Sarah Martinez had always believed that hard work would pay off. At 28, she worked 2 jobs to support her younger brother's college education while their parents struggled with medical bills back in their small hometown. Her morning job was at a downtown law firm where she cleaned offices before the lawyers arrived. Her evening job was at an upscale restaurant where she waited tables until closing time. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Sarah arrived at the law firm at 5 in the morning, her cleaning supplies in hand. The building was quiet except for the hum of air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic beginning to build outside. She moved efficiently through the offices, emptying trash cans, wiping down desks, and vacuuming carpets. The lawyers who worked here made more money in a day than she made in months, but she never felt bitter about it. She just focused on doing her job well. Around 7:30, as Sarah was finishing the conference room on the 15th floor, she heard voices in the hallway. This was unusual because most staff didn't arrive until 9. She continued working, not wanting to draw attention to herself. The voices grew louder, and she could tell there was some kind of argument happening. Through the glass walls of the conference room, Sarah could see 3 men in expensive suits. 2 of them were gesturing angrily at a woman in a business dress. The woman looked scared and was shaking her head repeatedly. Sarah couldn't hear what they were saying, but something felt wrong about the situation. The woman was young, probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back in a professional bun. She clutched a manila folder against her chest like it was protecting her from something. One of the men kept pointing at the folder and saying something that made the woman step backward. Sarah knew she should mind her own business. She was just the cleaning lady, invisible to most people who worked in this building, but something about the woman's frightened expression made her stomach turn. She had seen that look before on her own mother's face when bill collectors came to their door. The argument escalated quickly. The tallest man, who had silver hair and wore a navy blue suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent, grabbed for the folder. The woman pulled it away and ran toward the elevator bank. The men followed her, their voices echoing through the marble hallway. Sarah quietly opened the conference room door and peered out. She could see the elevator doors closing just as the 3 men reached them. The silver-haired man was furious. He punched the elevator call button repeatedly and shouted something about containing the situation. When the next elevator arrived, all 3 men got in. Sarah waited until she heard the elevator descend before she moved. Something told her to follow, even though every instinct warned her to stay out of it. She took the stairs, moving as quickly as she could while carrying her cleaning cart. By the time Sarah reached the ground floor, she was breathing hard. She pushed through the stairwell door and immediately saw the commotion in the lobby. The woman with the folder was near the building's main entrance, speaking rapidly into her cell phone. The 3 men had cornered her again, but this time there were other people around: early commuters, security guards, and other building employees. The silver-haired man was speaking in a low, threatening voice. Sarah couldn't hear the exact words, but his body language was clear. He wanted that folder, and he wasn't taking no for an answer. The woman kept shaking her head and backing toward the exit. Then everything happened very fast. The woman made a break for the door, but the shortest of the 3 men stepped in front of her. She tried to dodge around him, but her high heels made her stumble. As she fell, the man's foot came up, and Sarah watched in horror as he kicked the woman directly in the head. The sound was awful, a dull thud that seemed to echo through the marble lobby. The woman collapsed, the manila folder scattering its contents across the polished floor. Papers flew everywhere, some sliding under furniture, others floating in the air for a moment before settling. The lobby erupted in chaos. People screamed and rushed forward to help the fallen woman. The security guards were shouting into their radios. The 3 men looked panicked, realizing they had made a terrible mistake in front of so many witnesses. Sarah dropped her cleaning supplies and ran toward the woman. She had taken first aid classes when her mother was sick, and she could see that the woman was unconscious but breathing. Blood trickled from a cut above her left eye where the man's shoe had connected. "Call an ambulance," Sarah shouted to anyone who would listen. She knelt beside the woman and gently checked her pulse. It was weak but steady. Around them, people were picking up the scattered papers, and Sarah caught glimpses of what looked like financial documents and photographs. The 3 men were trying to collect the papers too, pushing people aside and grabbing whatever they could reach. The silver-haired man kept looking toward the entrance as if expecting someone to arrive at any moment. Sarah stayed with the unconscious woman, talking to her softly, even though she couldn't respond. "You're going to be okay," she whispered. "Help is coming." She used tissues from her cleaning supplies to gently dab at the blood on the woman's forehead. The paramedics arrived within minutes, followed closely by police officers. As they worked on the injured woman, Sarah noticed something strange. The three men who had caused all this trouble were no longer trying to collect papers. Instead, they had moved to the far side of the lobby and were standing very still, like they were waiting for instructions. That's when Sarah saw them. 3 black cars with government license plates pulling up outside the building. Even from inside, she could see that these weren't ordinary vehicles. They had the kind of official presence that made everyone stop and stare. The woman on the stretcher was starting to regain consciousness as the paramedics prepared to move her. Her eyes fluttered open, and the first thing she did was look around frantically for something. When her gaze met Sarah's, she grabbed her hand with surprising strength. "The papers," she whispered urgently. "Don't let them get all the papers." Sarah squeezed her hand reassuringly, but before she could respond, the lobby doors opened and 3 men in military uniforms walked in. Even Sarah, who knew nothing about military ranks, could tell these were important people. Everyone in the lobby seemed to sense it too. Conversations stopped and people stepped aside to make room. The generals had arrived, and Sarah had a feeling that everything was about to change. The 3 generals moved through the lobby with the kind of authority that made everyone step back without being asked. Sarah had never seen anything like it. People who moments before had been loudly discussing what they had witnessed suddenly became quiet and watchful. Even the police officers seemed uncertain about how to proceed. The lead general was a tall woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Her uniform was crisp and covered with ribbons and medals that spoke of a long and distinguished career. The 2 men flanking her looked equally impressive. One was built like a linebacker with kind eyes, while the other was lean and sharp-featured with the bearing of someone used to making difficult decisions. Sarah was still kneeling beside the stretcher where the injured woman was being prepared for transport to the hospital. The woman, whose name she had learned from the paramedics was Jessica Chen, kept squeezing Sarah's hand and looking around nervously at all the activity. "Ma'am, I'm General Patricia Hayes," the lead officer said, addressing Jessica directly. Her voice was firm but not unkind. "We need to discuss what happened here this morning." Jessica tried to sit up on the stretcher, but the paramedic gently pressed her back down. "I need to get to the hospital," she said weakly. "I think I have a concussion." "The medical team will take excellent care of you," General Hayes replied. "But first we need to secure any materials that may have been compromised during this incident." Sarah watched as the 3 men in expensive suits approached the generals. The silver-haired man who had seemed so threatening earlier now looked nervous and deferential. He spoke in whispers to General Hayes, occasionally glancing at Jessica and the scattered papers that people were still collecting. The second general, the one built like a linebacker, was methodically gathering documents from the floor. Sarah noticed that he handled each paper carefully, as if it contained information that could be dangerous in the wrong hands. When he reached the area near Sarah and Jessica, he paused. "Excuse me, miss," he said to Sarah politely. "Did you witness what happened here?" Sarah nodded. "I saw those 3 men corner her. When she tried to leave, that one there kicked her in the head." She pointed at the shortest of the suited men, who was now standing very quietly near the building's security desk. The general made a note in a small notebook. "And you are?" "Sarah Martinez." "I work here. I clean the offices upstairs." "Ms. Martinez, what you witnessed here this morning involves matters of national security. I'm going to need you to come with us for a brief discussion about what you saw." Sarah felt her heart rate increase. "National security?" She looked at Jessica, who was watching the conversation with growing alarm. "Am I in trouble?" Sarah asked. "Not at all," the 3rd general assured her. He had been quiet until now, but his voice carried the weight of someone used to command. "We just need to understand exactly what happened and ensure that sensitive information doesn't fall into the wrong hands." The paramedics were ready to transport Jessica to the hospital. As they began to move the stretcher, Jessica grabbed Sarah's hand again. "Please," she whispered urgently. "There's something you need to know about those papers." General Hayes stepped closer to the stretcher. "Ms. Chen, any information you need to share can be discussed through proper channels. Right now your health is the priority." "No, you don't understand," Jessica said, her voice getting stronger despite her injury. Those men weren't trying to steal classified documents. They were trying to destroy evidence of fraud, military contract fraud involving billions of dollars. The lobby, which had been buzzing with quiet conversations, fell completely silent. Sarah could feel the tension in the air change immediately. The three generals exchanged glances that seemed to communicate volumes without words. "Ms. Chen," General Hayes said carefully, "these are serious allegations. Are you certain about what you're saying?" Jessica nodded, then winced as the movement aggravated her head injury. "I'm an auditor for the Defense Department. I've been investigating irregularities in contracts awarded to Morrison Defense Systems. Those three men work for Morrison. They've been paying off officials to inflate contract values and deliver substandard equipment to our troops overseas." The silver-haired man stepped forward, his face red with anger. "That's completely false. This woman has been trying to damage our company's reputation with baseless accusations. We came here this morning to discuss her unfounded claims in a civilized manner." "By kicking her in the head?" Sarah asked before she could stop herself. Everyone turned to look at her and she felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. But she continued anyway. "I saw what happened. She was trying to leave and you wouldn't let her." General Hayes studied the silver-haired man for a long moment. "Mr. Morrison, I presume?" "Richard Morrison, CEO of Morrison Defense Systems. And I want to make it clear that any physical altercation was purely accidental. Ms. Chen fell while trying to flee the scene with stolen proprietary information." "The papers belong to the government," Jessica said firmly. "I'm a federal auditor doing my job. Those documents prove that Morrison Defense has been systematically defrauding the military for the past 3 years." Sarah watched as the generals processed this information. The atmosphere in the lobby had shifted from confusion to something much more serious. She could see security cameras mounted throughout the space and realized that everything that had happened was probably recorded. The linebacker-sized general approached Morrison and his two associates. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need you to remain here while we sort this out. This building is now under military jurisdiction until we can determine the scope of what we're dealing with." "You can't do that," one of Morrison's men protested. "We have rights. This is a civilian building." "Actually, we can," General Hayes replied calmly. "The moment national security became involved, this became a federal matter. And if Ms. Chen's allegations prove accurate, this could involve treason charges." The word treason seemed to hit Morrison like a physical blow. He staggered backward and leaned against the security desk for support. Sarah had never seen someone's face change color so quickly. Jessica was being wheeled toward the ambulance, but she called out to Sarah. "The papers under the reception desk. Make sure they get those. The blue folder has the banking records." Sarah looked toward the reception area and saw several sheets of paper that had slid underneath the heavy marble desk. Without thinking, she crawled over and retrieved them. When she stood up, she found herself holding documents covered with numbers, dates, and official-looking stamps. General Hayes extended her hand. "I'll take those, Ms. Martinez." Sarah hesitated for just a moment. Something about Jessica's desperation made her want to make sure these papers didn't just disappear. "Will Ms. Chen be safe at the hospital?" "She'll have full protection," the third general assured her. "Ms. Chen is now a key witness in what appears to be a major federal investigation. Her safety is our top priority." As Sarah handed over the documents, she noticed that several pages had bank account numbers highlighted in yellow. Even she could tell that the amounts involved were enormous, millions and millions of dollars. The ambulance doors closed, and Jessica was transported to the hospital with what Sarah now realized was probably a military escort. The lobby was being cleared of everyone except essential personnel, the 3 Morrison Defense employees and Sarah herself. "Ms. Martinez," General Hayes said, "we're going to need a detailed statement from you about everything you witnessed this morning. This may take several hours." Sarah thought about her evening job at the restaurant, about her brother's tuition payment that was due next week, about all the ordinary concerns that had seemed so important when she woke up that morning. Now she was involved in something that could affect national security. "Will I be able to go home tonight?" she asked. "That depends on what we discover in the next few hours," General Hayes replied. "But I can promise you this. Your cooperation in this matter is not just appreciated, it's essential. You may have helped uncover one of the largest military procurement scandals in recent history." As Sarah looked around the lobby that had been transformed into what appeared to be a federal crime scene, She realized that her life had just changed forever. 2 hours later, Sarah found herself in a conference room on the 20th floor of the same building where she had been cleaning offices that morning. The room had been converted into a temporary command center, with laptops, secure phones, and stacks of documents covering every surface. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, she could see federal agents setting up barriers around the building's entrance. General Hayes sat across from Sarah at the polished conference table, while a young officer with a digital recorder took notes of their conversation. The questions had been detailed and repetitive. What time did she arrive? What exactly did she see? What did the men say to each other? How did Jessica Chen behave before and after the attack? Let me make sure I understand correctly, General Hayes said, reviewing her notes. You observed the 3 Morrison Defense employees pursuing Ms. Chen from the 15th floor to the lobby. During this pursuit, they made repeated attempts to obtain a manila folder she was carrying. When she tried to leave the building, James Wheeler, the shorter man, deliberately kicked her in the head. Sarah nodded. It wasn't an accident. He saw her trying to get around him, and he lifted his foot and kicked her right in the temple. The sound was horrible. The general made another note, and the folder's contents scattered across the lobby floor immediately after the assault. Yes, papers went everywhere. Some people tried to help by picking them up, but those 3 men were grabbing whatever they could reach. They looked desperate to get those documents back. Ms. Martinez, what I'm about to tell you cannot be shared with anyone outside this room. Do you understand? Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Yes, ma'am. The documents that Ms. Chen was carrying contained evidence of a conspiracy that goes far beyond Morrison Defense Systems. We're talking about a network of defense contractors, military procurement officers, and congressional staff members who have been systematically stealing from the American taxpayers for years. The scope of what General Hayes was describing made Sarah feel dizzy. How much money are we talking about? Conservative estimates suggest over $2 billion in fraudulent contracts over the past 5 years. Money that was supposed to provide our soldiers with quality equipment and supplies was instead diverted into private bank accounts. Sarah thought about her brother studying engineering on his college, ROTC scholarship, planning to serve his country after graduation. The idea that someone would steal money meant to protect soldiers like him made her angry in a way she had rarely experienced. What happens now? She asked. That depends partly on you, General Hayes replied. The security cameras in this building captured most of what happened this morning, but your eyewitness testimony is crucial. You're the only person who observed the entire sequence of events from beginning to end. Before Sarah could respond, there was a knock on the conference room door. The 3rd general, the lean, sharp-featured man, entered carrying a tablet computer. We have a problem, he announced without preamble. Morrison's people have been busy. They've already filed a civil lawsuit, claiming that Ms. Chen stole proprietary company information. They're painting her as a disgruntled employee who fabricated evidence to damage their reputation. General Hayes frowned. What about the assault? There were dozens of witnesses. They're claiming it was self-defense. According to their version, Ms. Chen attacked Wheeler when he tried to retrieve stolen documents and he was merely protecting himself. Sarah couldn't believe what she was hearing. That's completely false. She never attacked anyone. She was trying to get away from them. The general with the tablet looked at her seriously. Ms. Martinez, are you willing to testify to that under oath? In federal court with teams of expensive lawyers trying to discredit your testimony? The question hung in the air. Sarah thought about her simple life, her 2 jobs, her small apartment, her family's modest circumstances. She thought about the kind of legal team that a company like Morrison Defense could afford, and how they might try to destroy her credibility. But then she thought about Jessica Chen lying unconscious on the lobby floor, blood trickling from her head wound, whispering desperately about papers that needed to be protected. Yes, Sarah said firmly. I'll testify to what I saw. General Hayes smiled for the first time since Sarah had met her. I was hoping you'd say that, but I want you to understand what you're agreeing to. Morrison Defense has billions of dollars at stake. They'll investigate every aspect of your life looking for anything they can use to discredit you. They'll make you out to be unreliable, dishonest, or mentally unstable if they can. They can try, Sarah replied. But I know what I saw. The general with the tablet sat down at the table. There's something else you need to know. Ms. Chen isn't the first auditor to investigate Morrison Defense. 2 other investigators have worked on this case over the past 18 months. Where are they now? Sarah asked, though she was afraid she already knew the answer. One died in a car accident in Virginia 6 months ago. Single vehicle collision on a clear day with perfect weather conditions. The other one had a heart attack at age 34 with no history of heart problems. The room fell silent. Sarah felt a cold fear settle in her stomach. Are you saying they were murdered? We're saying that people involved in a $2 billion conspiracy have a lot to lose, General Hayes replied carefully, and they've shown they're willing to go to extreme lengths to protect their interests. Sarah's mouth went dry. Am I in danger? We're not going to let anything happen to you, the linebacker-sized general said, speaking for the first time since entering the room. You're now under federal protection. We have agents positioned throughout this building and watching your apartment. But Sarah, may I call you Sarah? You need to understand that your life has fundamentally changed. You can't go back to your normal routine until this case is resolved. The reality of the situation began to sink in. Sarah thought about her evening shift at the restaurant, about her regular customers who would wonder where she was. She thought about her brother expecting his tuition check, about her parents who would worry when they couldn't reach her. How long will this take? She asked. Federal investigations of this scope typically take months, General Hayes replied. But we're going to expedite this case because we believe there are lives at risk. Other auditors, other witnesses, other people who know too much about Morrison Defense's operations. A secure phone on the table began ringing. The general with the tablet answered it, speaking in brief coded phrases. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Ms. Chen is stable at the hospital, but there's been a development. Someone tried to access her room 20 minutes ago. Hospital security stopped 2 men claiming to be federal agents, but they had no proper identification. Sarah felt her heart racing. Morrison's people? Most likely. Which confirms that Ms. Chen has information they desperately want to keep secret. General Hayes stood up. Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. Are you prepared to see this through to the end, knowing the risks involved? Sarah looked around the conference room that had become the center of what was clearly a major federal investigation. She thought about all the ways her life could go wrong if she got involved in something this big. She could lose her jobs, her apartment, even her safety. But then she thought about Jessica Chen's voice as she lay bleeding on the stretcher. Don't let them get all the papers. I'm in, Sarah said. What do you need me to do? General Hayes exchanged glances with her colleagues. First, we need you to help us understand exactly what documents were scattered in that lobby. You had a better view than anyone else of what was in that folder. Second, we need you to help us figure out why Morrison's people were so desperate to get those papers back that they were willing to assault a federal auditor in front of dozens of witnesses. And third, the lean general added, we need you to help us stay one step ahead of people who have already killed to protect their secrets. Sarah realized that she was no longer just a witness to a crime. She had become a key player in an investigation that could bring down some of the most powerful people in the defense industry. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Outside the conference room windows, she could see more federal vehicles arriving. The investigation was expanding rapidly, and she was at the center of it all. By evening, the 20th floor had been transformed into a war room. Sarah watched in amazement as dozens of federal agents, military investigators, and technical specialists worked with quiet efficiency to analyze the documents recovered from the lobby. Large monitors displayed financial charts, organizational diagrams, and what appeared to be intercepted communications. Sarah had spent the afternoon working with a forensic accountant to reconstruct the contents of Jessica Chen's folder. Using her memory of where different papers had scattered, they had managed to piece together a clearer picture of Morrison Defense's fraudulent activities. The scope was staggering: fake invoices, inflated costs, equipment that was never delivered, and quality tests that had been falsified. Sarah, we need you to look at something, General Hayes called from across the room. She was standing next to a wall-mounted display showing a complex web of connections between companies, individuals, and bank accounts. As Sarah approached, she could see that Morrison Defense Systems was at the center of the web, but dozens of other companies were connected to it through various financial relationships. Some names she recognized from news reports: major defense contractors that supplied everything from military vehicles to communication systems. This is what we call a conspiracy map, the lean general explained. His name, Sarah had learned, was General Robert Chen, no relation to Jessica despite the shared surname. Every line represents a financial relationship or communication link between different parties in the conspiracy. Sarah studied the complex diagram. How many people are involved? At least 200 that we've identified so far, possibly more. Corporate executives, military procurement officers, congressional staff members, bank officials, even some Pentagon contractors who were supposed to be conducting oversight. The scale was overwhelming. Sarah had thought they were dealing with one corrupt company, but this appeared to be an entire network of people stealing from the military budget. The really concerning part, General Hayes continued, is that this conspiracy has been operating for years without detection. The only reason we discovered it was because Jessica Chen noticed irregularities in routine audit reports and decided to investigate further on her own time. Why didn't the regular oversight catch this? Sarah asked. General Chen pointed to several names on the conspiracy map that were highlighted in red. Because the people responsible for oversight were part of the conspiracy. They made sure that audits were assigned to compliant auditors, that quality inspections were conducted by compromised inspectors, and that any suspicious reports disappeared before they reached honest officials. Sarah felt a chill as she realized the implications. So Jessica was investigating this alone? Essentially, yes. She had started building her case over the past 6 months, collecting evidence piece by piece. When she finally had enough proof to expose the entire operation, she arranged to meet with Morrison defense executives this morning. But why would she meet with them if she knew they were criminals? She didn't know the full extent of their involvement, General Hayes replied. She thought she was dealing with isolated fraud within the company, not a conspiracy that included Morrison himself. When she walked into that conference room this morning with evidence of their crimes, they realized she had to be stopped. A communications specialist approached their group carrying a tablet. General Hayes, we've intercepted some troubling communications. Morrison Defense has hired a private security firm with connections to former intelligence operatives. They're calling it reputation management. But the conversation suggests something much more aggressive. General Hayes took the tablet and scrolled through what appeared to be encrypted messages. Her expression grew increasingly grim as she read. What does it say? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. They're discussing ways to neutralize the threat to their operations. Ms. Chen is specifically mentioned, but they're also talking about other potential witnesses. Sarah's blood ran cold. Including me? Your name appears in several messages, yes. The room seemed to spin around Sarah. She had gone from cleaning lady to target of a criminal conspiracy in less than 12 hours. The magnitude of the danger she was in began to sink in fully. We won't let anything happen to you, the linebacker general assured her. His name was General Marcus Williams, and despite his intimidating size, his voice was gentle and reassuring. But we need to discuss relocation options. Your apartment, your workplace, even your family may be at risk. Sarah thought about her brother at college, her parents in their small hometown. Can you protect them too? We're already moving on that, General Williams replied. Your brother is being quietly transferred to a military base where he'll be safe while completing his studies. Your parents are being offered a temporary relocation under witness protection guidelines. The idea of her entire family being uprooted because of something she witnessed was almost too much to bear. But before Sarah could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the floor. Red lights flashed and agents immediately moved to secure positions. What's happening? Sarah asked. But the generals were already in motion. General Chen was speaking rapidly into a secure phone while General Hayes activated what appeared to be a building-wide communication system. All units, this is command. We have a potential breach on the ground floor. Implement lockdown protocols immediately. Through the conference room's windows, Sarah could see federal agents taking positions in the street below. Several black SUVs had arrived and were disgorging more heavily armed personnel. Sarah, we need to move you to a more secure location, General Williams said, gently but firmly taking her arm. Morrison's people may be trying to access this building. As they moved toward an interior room with no windows, Sarah could hear radio chatter from the agent's communications. The words she caught were frightening. Armed intruders, potential explosives, and shoot-to-kill authorization. The secure room contained monitoring equipment that showed feeds from security cameras throughout the building. Sarah watched in horror as armed men in tactical gear moved through the lobby where she had been cleaning that morning. They moved with military precision, clearly professionals. How many? General Hayes asked the communications officer. At least 8 on the ground floor, possibly more in the surrounding area. They've disabled some of our exterior cameras, so we don't have full visibility. Sarah realized that people were willing to kill to keep their crimes secret, and she was now at the center of their target list. The morning's events had set in motion something far larger and more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. General Hayes, Sarah said quietly, I need you to know something. When I was collecting papers from the lobby floor, I saw something that might be important. All 3 generals turned to look at her. What did you see? There was a paper that had a list of dates and locations. Military bases, I think. Each one had a dollar amount next to it and a note about equipment delivery failures. General Chen leaned forward intently. Do you remember any of the base names? Sarah closed her eyes, trying to recall the document she had glimpsed for only a few seconds. There was something about Afghanistan and maybe a base in Germany. The dollar amounts were huge, millions for each location. The generals exchanged looks that seemed to communicate something significant. Sarah, General Hayes said carefully, those dates and locations could represent instances where substandard equipment was delivered to troops in combat zones. If soldiers died because of faulty equipment that Morrison Defense provided, we're not just looking at fraud. We're looking at charges that could carry the death penalty. The weight of that revelation settled over the room. Sarah had witnessed not just an assault, but the beginning of an investigation that could expose crimes resulting in military casualties. No wonder Morrison's people were desperate enough to risk a direct assault on a federal facility. Outside the secure room, she could hear the sounds of what appeared to be a firefight. The investigation had become a battle, and Sarah was the key witness that both sides desperately needed to control. The firefight lasted 23 minutes. Sarah counted every minute on the digital clock in the secure room, listening to the radio chatter as federal agents engaged with Morrison's hired mercenaries throughout the building. When silence finally fell, 5 of the intruders had been captured, 2 were dead, and 1 federal agent was wounded but stable. General Hayes emerged from coordinating the response with grim satisfaction. They made a critical error, she told Sarah. By attacking a federal facility with military personnel present, they've escalated this from fraud investigation to terrorism charges. Morrison Defense just handed us the legal authority to dismantle their entire operation. But Sarah barely heard the words. She was staring at one of the security monitors, which showed paramedics treating the wounded federal agent in the lobby, the same lobby where she had knelt beside Jessica Chen that morning, trying to stop the bleeding from her head wound. How did my life become this? Sarah asked quietly. General Williams sat down beside her. Sometimes ordinary people witness extraordinary crimes. When that happens, you have a choice. You can pretend you didn't see anything and hope the criminals leave you alone, or you can stand up and help fight for justice. And if I had chosen to pretend, based on what we've learned about Morrison Defense's methods, you probably wouldn't have lived through the week. General Chen replied bluntly. They've killed to protect smaller secrets than what you witnessed. A communications officer approached their group with an urgent expression. Generals, we've just received word from the hospital. Ms. Chen is awake and asking to speak with Ms. Martinez. Sarah felt a surge of relief. She's going to be okay? The doctors say her concussion was serious but not life-threatening. However, she's been providing additional information about the conspiracy that changes everything we thought we knew. 30 minutes later, Sarah found herself in the back of an armored federal vehicle, racing through the city streets toward the hospital. The convoy included 4 cars with armed agents, and she could see police blocking intersections to ensure their safe passage. General Hayes rode with Sarah, continuing to brief her on developments in the investigation. The men we captured this evening were carrying equipment that suggests they plan to take you alive, rather than kill you. They wanted to interrogate you about what you saw and what you might have remembered about those scattered documents. What would they have done after the interrogation? Based on their track record, they would have eliminated you and made it look like an accident. The hospital was under heavy security when they arrived. Federal agents had established a perimeter around the building, and Sarah could see snipers on nearby rooftops. Jessica Chen's room was on the 8th floor, surrounded by agents and medical equipment. When Sarah entered the room, Jessica looked small and fragile against the white hospital sheets, but her eyes were alert and determined. A bandage covered the left side of her head where Morrison's man had kicked her. "Sarah," Jessica said, reaching out to squeeze her hand. "I'm so glad you're safe. I heard about the attack on the building." "I'm just happy you're okay," Sarah replied, sitting in the chair beside the bed. "When I saw you unconscious on that stretcher, I was terrified." Jessica's expression grew serious. "Sarah, there's something I need to tell you about what you witnessed this morning. Something that makes this case even more important than the generals realize." General Hayes stepped closer to the bed. "Ms. Chen, anything you share with Ms. Martinez can be shared with the investigation team." "That's exactly why I need to tell her first," Jessica replied. "Because what I discovered goes beyond Morrison Defense. It involves people inside the Pentagon, inside Congress, even inside the Justice Department." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "You mean the investigation itself might be compromised?" "I don't know who we can trust," Jessica said quietly. "The evidence I collected didn't just show fraud in military contracts. It showed that classified military technology was being sold to foreign governments through fake defense contracts." The room fell silent. General Hayes looked shocked while the other generals exchanged grim glances. "Are you saying this is espionage?" General Williams asked. Jessica nodded carefully, wincing as the movement aggravated her head injury. Morrison Defense was creating fake contracts for advanced military equipment, then delivering inferior substitutes to our troops, while selling the real technology to the highest bidder. China, Russia, Iran, countries that are supposed to be our adversaries, were buying our most advanced weapon systems through this network. Sarah struggled to comprehend the magnitude of what Jessica was describing. "So when our soldiers went into combat with faulty equipment, they were using inferior weapons while our enemies had access to our best technology," Jessica finished. "It's not just theft, Sarah. It's treason on a scale that could have affected the outcome of military operations around the world." General Chen was speaking rapidly into his secure phone, presumably briefing higher authorities on this development. General Hayes began pacing the small hospital room, her mind clearly racing through the implications. "Ms. Chen," General Hayes said, "if what you're saying is accurate, then this investigation needs to be elevated to the highest levels of national security. We're talking about a conspiracy that could have compromised American military superiority." "That's why they tried so hard to get those documents back," Jessica replied. "And that's why they're willing to kill to keep this secret. The people involved aren't just looking at prison time. They're looking at charges of treason during wartime." Sarah remembered the document she had glimpsed with the list of military bases and equipment delivery failures. "Jessica, there was a paper that listed military bases where equipment failed. Were those bases where our soldiers were fighting with inferior weapons?" Jessica's eyes filled with tears. 17 different incidents over 3 years. Weapons that jammed in combat, body armor that failed to stop bullets it was designed to stop, communication equipment that failed during critical operations. We may never know how many American soldiers died because of Morrison Defense's betrayal. The weight of that revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought about her brother in ROTC, planning to serve his country, trusting that the equipment he would be given would protect him. The idea that someone would deliberately provide inferior gear to American soldiers for profit made her sick with rage. "What do we do now?" Sarah asked. General Hayes stopped pacing and looked directly at her. "Now we make sure that everyone involved in this conspiracy faces justice. But Sarah, this changes the level of danger you're in. Foreign intelligence services may now have an interest in silencing you to protect their sources within Morrison Defense." Before Sarah could respond, alarms began sounding in the hospital corridor. Through the room's window, she could see federal agents taking defensive positions. A nurse rushed into the room looking panicked. "We need to evacuate this floor immediately," the nurse announced. "Hospital security has identified multiple suspicious individuals attempting to access the building through different entrances." General Williams was already moving toward the window to assess potential escape routes. "They're making another attempt," he said grimly. "This time they're targeting the hospital directly." Jessica struggled to sit up in her hospital bed. "Sarah, listen to me carefully. There's one more thing you need to know. The most important document from this morning's incident wasn't in my folder." "What do you mean?" "I hid the master list, the document that names every person involved in the conspiracy, before I went to meet with Morrison's people." I knew they might try to take my evidence, so I kept the most crucial proof separate. General Hayes spun around to face Jessica. Where is it? That's what I need to tell Sarah. Because if something happens to me, she's the only person who will know where to find it. The sounds of gunfire echoed through the hospital corridors. Whatever forces Morrison Defense had assembled, they were making a desperate final push to eliminate the witnesses who could destroy their operation. Jessica grabbed Sarah's hand with surprising strength. The document is hidden in the cleaning supply closet on the 15th floor of the building where you work. Behind the box of industrial bleach, there's a loose panel in the wall. The complete list of conspirators is inside, along with bank records and communication intercepts that prove everything. Sarah memorized the location as more gunfire erupted in the hallway outside. Federal agents were shouting orders, and she could hear the sound of tactical teams moving through the hospital. We need to move now, General Chen announced, returning from his position near the door. They've breached the hospital's main security perimeter. As medical personnel prepared to move Jessica's bed to a more secure location, Sarah realized that she was no longer just a witness to a crime. She had become the keeper of evidence that could expose the largest military conspiracy in American history. The battle for control of that evidence was about to determine not just her fate, but potentially the security of the entire nation. The hospital evacuation was chaos controlled by military precision. Sarah found herself in the center of a formation of federal agents as they moved Jessica's hospital bed through corridors filled with armed personnel. The sound of gunfire had stopped, but the tension in the air suggested the threat was far from over. They reached a service elevator that had been secured by additional agents. As they descended to the hospital's underground parking garage, General Hayes briefed Sarah on what would happen next. We're taking you and Ms. Chen to a secure federal facility outside the city, she explained. While you're there, we'll retrieve the documents Ms. Chen described from your workplace. Once we have that evidence, we can begin making arrests throughout the conspiracy. How long will that take? Sarah asked. If everything goes according to plan, 48 hours. But Sarah, you need to understand that Morrison Defense has resources we're still discovering. They may have people we haven't identified yet, including inside law enforcement or intelligence agencies. The parking garage was filled with black federal vehicles, their engines running and ready for immediate departure. Sarah helped transfer Jessica from the hospital bed into one of the armored cars, making sure her IV lines and monitoring equipment remained connected. As their convoy pulled out of the hospital, Sarah looked back at the building that had been under siege. She could see news vans arriving, their bright lights illuminating the emergency vehicles and federal agents still securing the scene. By tomorrow morning, this would be national news, though she doubted the public would learn the full truth about what was really happening. During the hour-long drive to the federal facility, Jessica shared more details about her investigation. She had been working alone for months, following financial trails that led from Morrison Defense to shell companies in the Cayman Islands, then to banks in Switzerland and Luxembourg. The money involved was staggering, not just the $2 billion in fraudulent contracts, but additional billions from the sale of classified military technology. The hardest part was realizing how many people had to be involved, Jessica explained, her voice weak but determined. You can't sell advanced weapon systems to foreign governments without help from people inside the Pentagon, the State Department, even the CIA. This conspiracy required cooperation at the highest levels of government. Sarah tried to process the implications. So some of the people investigating this case might actually be part of the conspiracy? It's possible, General Hayes admitted from the front seat. That's why we're keeping the circle of trusted personnel very small, and why we moved so quickly to secure you both. The federal facility turned out to be a converted military base about 60 miles outside the city. High walls topped with razor wire surrounded buildings that looked like they could withstand a direct assault. Sarah had never seen anything like it outside of movies. Inside, the facility was surprisingly comfortable. Sarah was assigned a suite of rooms with secure communications equipment, comfortable furniture, and access to a well-stocked library. Jessica was taken to a medical wing where she could recover under the protection of military doctors and nurses. This is where you'll stay until we can ensure your safety, General Williams explained as he showed Sarah around her temporary home. You'll have access to secure phones to contact your family, internet access for entertainment, and a full staff to meet any needs you might have. It's like a very comfortable prison, Sarah observed. That's not entirely inaccurate, General Williams replied honestly. But it's the only way we can guarantee your protection while this investigation unfolds. That evening, Sarah watched the news coverage of the hospital incident from her secure room. The reports described it as a terrorist attack on a federal facility, but provided no details about the underlying investigation. She wondered how many people watching the news realized they were seeing the beginning of the exposure of the largest military conspiracy in American history. A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. General Hayes entered carrying a tablet computer and looking more serious than Sarah had yet seen her. "Sarah, we have a problem. We sent a team to retrieve the documents from your workplace, but they're gone." Sarah's heart sank. "Gone? What do you mean?" "Someone got there first. The cleaning supply closet on the 15th floor was completely empty. Not just the documents, everything. They removed every cleaning supply, every piece of equipment, even the shelves themselves. But how could they know where to look?" General Hayes sat down across from Sarah, her expression grim. "That's what we're trying to figure out. Either someone followed Ms. Chen when she hid the documents or what? Or someone in our investigation team is feeding information to Morrison Defense. The possibility that their own people might be compromised sent a chill through Sarah. If they couldn't trust the federal agents protecting them, then nowhere was truly safe. What happens now?" Sarah asked. "We're going to proceed on the assumption that there's a leak in our operation. That means we can't rely on the evidence Ms. Chen hid, and we can't trust all of our personnel." "But Sarah, there's one advantage we still have." "Why? What's that?" "You remember seeing that document with the list of military bases and equipment failures. Ms. Chen's hidden papers might be gone, but your memory of what you saw could still be enough to break this case wide open." General Hayes activated the tablet and showed Sarah a map of the world with military bases marked in different colors. "We need you to try to remember everything you can about that document. Base names, dates, dollar amounts, anything that might help us identify which military operations were compromised." Sarah closed her eyes and tried to recall the few seconds when she had seen the documents scattered on the lobby floor. The information had been arranged in columns with base names on the left and dollar amounts on the right. "There was definitely something about Afghanistan," she said slowly. "A base with a name that started with K, maybe Kandahar. And the dollar amount was huge, something like 40 million. General Hayes made notes on the tablet. "What else?" "There was a date in 2023 and a note about communications equipment failure during Operation something. I couldn't read the full operation name." "That could be Operation Desert Shield," General Hayes murmured. "There was a communications failure during a critical mission that resulted in casualties. If Morrison Defense provided faulty equipment for that operation..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah understood the implications. American soldiers had died because of equipment that failed when they needed it most. And Morrison Defense had known the equipment was substandard when they delivered it. "There's more," Sarah said, pressing her memory. "I saw something about Germany and maybe Japan. It looked like this wasn't just affecting combat zones. They were delivering faulty equipment to bases all over the world." As Sarah continued to recall details from the scattered document, General Hayes built a clearer picture of the scope of Morrison Defense's betrayal. The conspiracy hadn't just stolen money. It had systematically weakened American military capabilities while strengthening potential enemies. "Sarah," General Hayes said when they had exhausted her memory of the document, "what you've remembered tonight may be the key to exposing this entire conspiracy. But it also makes you the most valuable witness in a case that powerful people will kill to suppress." "I understand. Do you? Because starting tomorrow we're going to need you to testify before a grand jury, provide depositions to federal prosecutors, and eventually testify in open court. Throughout that process, Morrison Defense and their allies will do everything possible to discredit, intimidate, or eliminate you." Sarah looked out the window of her secure room at the military base that had become her temporary home. Somewhere out there, the people responsible for betraying American soldiers were planning their next move. They had billions of dollars, connections throughout the government, and a willingness to commit murder to protect their secrets. But they had made one critical error. They had attacked Jessica Chen in front of a witness who was willing to fight back. "General Hayes," Sarah said quietly, "when do we start?" 6 months later, Sarah stood outside the federal courthouse in Washington, D.C., watching news crews set up their equipment for what had become known as the Morrison defense trials. The conspiracy she had witnessed unfold from a scattered Manila folder had grown into the largest military procurement scandal in American history. The numbers were staggering. Over 200 people had been indicted, including Morrison defense executives, Pentagon officials, congressional staff members, and foreign intelligence operatives. The fraudulent contracts totaled $2.8 billion. Most shocking of all, investigators had documented 17 separate incidents where faulty equipment provided by Morrison Defense had contributed to American military casualties. Sarah had testified before 3 different grand juries, provided over 40 hours of depositions, and survived 2 additional assassination attempts. The federal protection program had become her new reality, but she had never wavered in her commitment to see justice done. Today was the final day of Richard Morrison's trial. The silver-haired CEO who had seemed so threatening in that lobby 6 months ago now looked like a broken man. The evidence against him was overwhelming, built from Sarah's testimony, Jessica Chen's recovered documents, and financial records seized from banks around the world. General Hayes approached Sarah as she stood on the courthouse steps. The general had become something of a friend during the long investigation, and Sarah could see relief in her eyes as they neared the end of this chapter. The jury's been deliberating for 3 hours, General Hayes reported. The prosecutors think we'll have a verdict today. How do you think it will go? Sarah asked. Morrison's lawyers tried everything they could to discredit your testimony, but the financial evidence backs up everything you witnessed. Plus, when we finally tracked down those hidden documents, they were in a safety deposit box in the Cayman Islands. They confirmed every detail of what you remembered. Sarah smiled, remembering the breakthrough that had come 2 months into the investigation. Jessica Chen had eventually recalled creating multiple copies of her evidence, hiding them in different locations as insurance. When federal agents finally located the complete records, they provided a roadmap to the entire conspiracy. Any word on Jessica? Sarah asked. She's doing well. The head injury healed completely, and she's been promoted to lead the new Pentagon office for contract fraud prevention. I think you'll be seeing her at the sentencing hearing next month. The massive oak doors of the courthouse opened, and a court officer announced that the jury had reached a verdict. Sarah joined the crowd of investigators, prosecutors, and journalists filing into the courtroom for the final chapter of the Morrison defense scandal. Richard Morrison sat at the defense table looking pale and defeated. His team of expensive lawyers shuffled papers nervously, knowing that their client faced the possibility of life in prison if convicted on the most serious charges. The jury foreman, a retired military officer, stood to read the verdict. Sarah found herself holding her breath as he began to speak. On the charge of conspiracy to defraud the United States government, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of providing false statements in relation to defense contracts, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit espionage, we find the defendant guilty. The list continued for nearly 10 minutes. Guilty on all charges. Morrison would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, and his company would be dissolved with all assets forfeited to the government. As the judge dismissed the jury and scheduled sentencing, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring back the soldiers who had died because of Morrison Defense's betrayal. Outside the courthouse, General Hayes addressed the assembled media. This investigation began when a brave woman named Sarah Martinez witnessed an assault and refused to stay silent. Her courage led to the exposure of a conspiracy that threatened our national security and cost American lives. Today's verdict sends a clear message that betraying our military personnel will be met with the full force of justice. Later that evening, Sarah sat in a restaurant in downtown Washington with Jessica Chen and the 3 generals who had led the investigation. The federal protection program would continue for another year as a precaution, but the immediate danger had passed with Morrison's conviction. I keep thinking about that morning when I was just cleaning offices, Sarah said, raising her glass in a toast. I never imagined that picking up scattered papers could lead to all this. You did more than pick up papers, Jessica replied. You chose to stand up when it would have been easier to walk away. You saved lives by ensuring this conspiracy was exposed. General Williams nodded. The Pentagon has implemented new oversight procedures based on what we learned from this case. It will be much harder for anyone to pull off this kind of fraud in the future. What happens to you now? General Chen asked Sarah. Sarah had been thinking about that question for weeks. The federal government had offered her a position with the Inspector General's office, investigating fraud in government contracts. Her brother had graduated from college and was now serving as a second lieutenant in the Army. Using equipment she could trust was genuine and effective. Her parents had been relocated to a comfortable retirement community, their medical bills covered by a grateful government. "I think I want to keep fighting fraud," Sarah said, "but maybe from the inside this time. I've learned that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences when they're willing to stand up for what's right." As they finished dinner, Sarah looked around the table at the people who had become her friends and allies over the past 6 months. The investigation had changed all their lives, but it had also proven something important about the power of truth and the courage of individuals willing to seek justice. 6 months ago, Sarah Martinez had been a cleaning lady working 2 jobs to support her family. Tonight, she was dining with generals and preparing to begin a new career, protecting the integrity of government operations. The manila folder that had scattered across a lobby floor had changed not just her life, but the lives of countless soldiers who would never know how close they had come to being betrayed by the people they trusted to protect them. The Morrison defense conspiracy was over, but Sarah's commitment to justice was just beginning. Tomorrow she would start her new job investigating the next case of fraud against the American people. Because someone had to watch the watchers, and Sarah had learned that sometimes the most important person for that job is someone who started by simply picking up scattered papers and refusing to let injustice go, unpunished. As she walked out of the restaurant, into the cool evening air, Sarah thought about all the ordinary people going about their daily lives, unaware of the extraordinary events that had shaped their security. She had been one of those ordinary people once, but she had learned that extraordinary courage could emerge from the most unexpected places. The investigation was over, but the fight for justice would continue, and Sarah Martinez would be there, watching and waiting, ready to stand up whenever truth needed a defender.